Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my dear friends. I'm happy to be here with you today. I hope you are really well. I've just come back from a short little working retreat at actually my mother's home. And she has this beautiful, what she calls sanctuary and studio space that I get to go to at least once a year by myself. And it's so special. This is part of my, I actually did a whole episode on highly sensitive, or the HSP retreat. This is part of, an important part of my life and be like how I maintain and am able to show up in my life in all the different arenas that I do so brightly, so full of life, so dedicatedly. And I just had such a sweet time this time, even though I actually chose to make this a working retreat. I could actually do some special projects there in a new space, or not really new, but away from the daily rhythm of life. And I got some really nice time connecting with my parents. It was just lovely. I highly recommend you check out the HSP retreat podcast episode. If you haven't yet, it's episode 57, because it's such a treasure to implement these retreats for yourself. My clients who have done so love them and feel so rejuvenated by them. So totally check that out. And but I wanted to share that I had this great time, but it was only like 3 days, and which is enough. It's enough. But I came back, and this morning, I came back last night or yesterday afternoon, and was kind of hit by I thought I'd be all reinvigorated, but I was kind of hit by this slothfulness and this foggy brain, and just I felt like a vehicle kind of trying to strain its way out of the mud. And I had planned to record a different podcast today for you all, but my brain just wasn't. It just wasn't turning. The wheels in that brain of mine were not turning, particularly on the topic I had planned, or just kind of at all. And a part of me was kind of surprised by this. I was like, well, I've had these 3 days. I should be feeling more, rested and clear-headed and ready to go. But that just wasn't the case. So I did do my classic, fighting it a little bit and trying to push through until I really recognized what I was doing and how I was forgetting one of the most essential modes that we as highly sensitive people need to be in, need to allow ourselves to be in, which is the ticket. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm feeling better now because I actually allowed myself to go into this other mode that most of us don't allow ourselves to. And as highly sensitive people, and as humans in general, we do have two really important modes that we need to be in and allow ourselves to be in when we are working to create anything, when we're working to create change anywhere in our lives, when we're looking to accomplish anything. And of course, this applies absolutely in our marriages as we're working to maintain a healthy one, or as we're working to make our marriage even more healthy, or pull it out of an unhealthy place and into a good space. I recently talked about one of them, or referred to it, not in so many words, or actually in a lot more words than I will right now, in the podcast episode, Learned, Not Innate. And that mode is proactive, right? I talked a lot about being, very actively applying the things that you're learning from this podcast. And in general, that in a marriage, for it to grow and maintain and get better and better and have less and less problems, it takes proactive effort, right? And proactive learning and implementing that learning, right? Taking action to make the marriage better. And I am always doing that myself. And I want to be careful about my language. I just caught myself saying I always am doing that. I'm always doing that. That's not true. So scratch that part. I do a lot of that. And I think, we all get this when it comes to various parts of our lives, like if we want to become good at an aspect of our career, we need to learn and take action and apply the things we learn around doing that thing, right? Like if we want to be a great accountant, we need to learn how to be an accountant. We need to practice with those numbers and do the work, right? So this is the action part. And our society does emphasize action, like it's actually seen as the valuable part of growth and change. And, right, like being productive and taking action, that's like, ooh, we all want to get down on our knees and bow to the Lord of action, right? And of course, this is because we live in a society that is, since the industrial revolution, it's all been all about like industrial growth and growth, action, right? So we've internalized this as highly sensitive people, and we do a lot of that. I mean, most of us living in this society, we don't do a lot of just lazing around for days and days, right? I mean, even the way I just said that, I'm catching myself. Like I call it I just called it lazing around. What would have been more accurate to say is I like just lying around, just sitting and staring, right? And so that is the other mode that's so overlooked and under-respected, undervalued. This is really a receptive mode. Receptive, resting, integrating mode, right? This is when we're not actively doing anything, right? We're not actually doing anything, but it's kind of like we're like receiving the fruits of our labor, or we're making space inside of ourselves for the next active phase, right? It's like we're not trying to do anything, not trying to get or create any change actively, but we're making space for it to happen, right? We're resting back and we're making space for whatever is right now in our life as it is. In other words, we're doing nothing. We're laying fallow. We're just being. And like I was saying earlier, that can look to an outside observer like we're being lazy, right? Someone who's in this active sort of industrial society mindset, right, which most of us are, would see that person in this receptive mode as, being lazy. But the truth is, both of these modes are essential to growing, right? There's the proactive mode, absolutely essential, right? And the receptive mode is equally important. And I think especially for highly sensitive people, we need to allow ourselves the receptive times. The times of not doing, the times of not trying, the times of not pushing, the times of relaxing back, allowing, and what I think of as really integrating. And this is not an active process. It can be. You can integrate like new learnings in a active way, but also it's integrating in you kind of subconsciously below the surface without your proactive conscious effort. So for me, as an example from this morning, it was like, I was noticing I was wanting to stay in my active mode. Like that's like, it can bring up a lot of fear and discomfort when we try to allow ourselves to be more in the second mode, this receptive mode, because again, all the conditioning that we have that like being proactive and active and acting is the best way, right? And so when we're not doing that, when we're not creating and being productive or learning and applying, it can lead to, oh no, something's going wrong, right? When we are choosing to be receptive, it can bring up that fear. So for me this morning, I kind of had this like back and forth wobble inside of myself about like, okay, I'm going to let myself take a walk. This is one of my ways of being receptive. I just go for walks. And I know I'm being active by walking, but I'm not using my brain. I'm not trying to do anything other than put one foot in front of the other, right? And so doing that, my brain did keep saying, hey, you should get to work. You should be doing your podcast, like, right? And I was just like, it's okay. Like, I'm going to trust. I'm going to just keep walking. I'm going to allow myself to percolate, just do nothing other than walk and trust that the energy and the clarity and the capacity to record my podcast today would come back when I was ready, when my mind, body, heart system were ready. And that, again, that takes trust. And so, right, it takes trusting the sort of percolation, right? The integration of all the things you've been learning. And what I want to offer as the example here of like you listening to this podcast or my clients learning with me, instead of feeling like they need to apply all the time and go, which all of that's good too. Like I said in that Learn But Not Innate podcast, so key to take action and do the things we learned, right? And actively create change. And instead of believing that that's the only way you're going to get anywhere and make the changes you want, or my clients are going to be able to make the changes they want, I encourage you and my clients to allow those moments when you aren't pushing forward, when you aren't taking action, right? And you are allowing the integration to happen. And you are relaxing back and not doing anything proactively. But again, this can take a lot of trust. It can feel kind of like a radical act to allow ourselves to not do much of anything for a period of time and know that that's actually going to serve us better than continuing to take action. Right? And so that's going to come up for most people who live in this modern world. So I want to offer a few metaphors for you that can support you and that have supported me in allowing myself to be in receptive mode, to stay in receptive mode, and to dip into receptive mode often. I'm still not perfect at this, but it's been a big growth point for me over the last couple years. So the first kind of analogy I want to offer you is the one of feeding and nourishing our bodies, right? If you think about it, there's an active phase and a passive phase, right? The active phase is when we go like buy the food or grow the food, and then we prepare the food, we cook it, and then we chew the food, and then we swallow the food, right? That's all action. But then there's this passive kind of receptive phase where we don't do anything at all. We just allow the food to be digested. Yeah? And we know that that's happening. I mean, when we think about it intellectually, we don't feel it necessarily, although we might. But when we step back and think about it, we trust that our food and body will do its thing, right? That our body will digest it, and then we will be nourished. This is how nature works. It's the magic and beauty of life. So ingesting this podcast, taking action on the ideas that I've offered, or if you're my client, or if you're going to be my client, implementing what I teach you, taking action on all of that learning and ingesting, but then also letting yourself have these moments when you're kind of being passive around it. That doesn't sound quite right, but like when you're not taking active, proactive action. You're just digesting, where you're letting your mind, body, heart system do its thing with no intervention from you. And you're trusting it to do what it will, all the good things with all the learnings you've had and all the actions you've taken. What's fascinating is that actually our striving, our kind of over-efforting, or our action, when we're in that mode too much, it can actually have the opposite effect that we wanted it to. We can actually make it harder to learn and grow and make changes, especially as highly sensitive people, because it exhausts us and ultimately makes us less effective. And it's almost like we can't, it doesn't sink in fully, right? And especially as highly sensitive people, where we do have this beautiful deep processing. So many of you are going to relate to this. Like, obviously, like, information overload can happen so easily to us as highly sensitive people. And maybe we should make up a new term called effort overload. Right? Not good for us as highly sensitive people. And an analogy that's useful here is if we think about athletes, right? The current understandings about what makes a really amazing athlete, or an athlete like to be at their peak, at their best performance capacity, is not to go hard and train hard every single day, but actually to take breaks in the training, to allow the body to rejuvenate and repair so that it can ultimately gain a lot more from the workouts and ultimately get results faster, right? Actually get stronger faster, or get faster. Or we can look at nature again and think about like the 4 seasons. We don't expect our garden to be growing and reaping a harvest all year long, at least not in most of the world. And if we made that garden and we tried to force that garden to produce all year long, eventually you're going to get a very undernourished soil that can't produce good harvests. There is an essential fallow period that we need to let that garden have, so the plants can go to sleep, or they can die and decompose, and the soil can have a break and ultimately be nourished by the decomposing of all those things, right? Or maybe we give it some manure or compost. But basically it needs a rest period. It needs a fallow period, and you are the same. You as a human being, as a highly sensitive person, so much magic actually happens in that rest, fallow, kind of receptive period. That's why I call it the receptive period, because it actually isn't, although it might look like inaction, it is not that nothing's happening, right? Again, it's that under the surface of you, all this stuff is integrating. And the metaphor I love for this is, it's like if you've ever planted seeds or seen, and we all know what happens when we plant a seed, right? For a little while, it just sits there. Sometimes even just in the dark, in moist soil, and does nothing, at least to our naked eye, right? Looks like nothing's happening if you look at that seed, sometimes for a long time. But under the surface, that seed is like, amazing things are happening inside that seed. Crazy cells are like, they're doing all these crazy things that I don't know. I should ask my sister. She's an amazing plant scientist. I don't know all the details of it, but I know it's magic what's happening. And below the soil, little roots are coming out, and they're stretching their little tendrils deep into the soil, and they're getting nourishment from that soil. Still, we don't see anything happening, right? And then all of a sudden, after weeks of nothing happening, it sprouts. And you see this beautiful new shoot come up, and it grows so rapidly. It's like a miracle. any artist, and maybe many of you are artists, so many of us highly sensitive people are very creative or want to be or have this inclination towards creativity, you maybe will understand this on some level already, right? That there are creative cycles. Sometimes you just need to lay fallow for a while, and then you burst forth with all this creativity and life. Yeah? So my invitation from today's podcast is really to allow yourself times where you do lay fallow, where you let yourself just receive what your life already is, and you don't try too hard with learning and changing and creating changes in your marriage. And this can apply to anything you're trying to do in your life, right? And perhaps this is just a few extra hours in your week, or maybe it's certain months weeks out of the month, days out of the month, or even months out of the year. And it doesn't have to be like you schedule it specifically. It can just be you listen to yourself and you go with what your mind, body, heart system is needing. And you can, as a highly sensitive person, you can really sense that in yourself. Is now a time I need to be more in passive receptive mode and integration mode, might be a better term or a term you like more, or is now an active mode time for me? Good questions to ask yourself. This morning, it turned out, even though I thought it was going to be an active mode time for me, it wasn't. It was a receptive, passive, fallow mode moment. And I allowed myself to have that, and it made it so that I could be active like I am right now by sharing this podcast with you. Now, on this note, I structure my client sessions in my coaching programs to make space for these two modes. We do a 3-week on and a 1-week off schedule. Of course, my clients always have access to the learning site, so they may choose to take those, what I call down weeks, those off weeks, and continue to learn and implement what they're learning in their marriages and lives. They might choose that. That's totally fine. But I structure that way so that they do have that option to honor that part of them that needs the integration time, if it feels like that's what they need, right? So they can check in with themselves and decide for themselves if that's good for them or not. I think most of my clients love this rhythm. And it also allows me to have more downtime to do the same so that I can show up best for you and for my clients. And in fact, like I said earlier, this has been a growth point for me, or growing edge for me over the last maybe 2 years, quite actively. It's been challenging work for me to set these kinds of boundaries for myself and to really give myself full permission to chill and not act. But I've learned through experimentation and some gentle, loving discipline with myself to actually stick to my allowing of my fallow moments, receptive mode, and actually multiple quote unquote failures at it where I'm like, oh, I'm not letting myself do that today. Oh, I can't do that. I don't trust that it will be okay. Right? I've done that a lot too, where I've just pushed through even when I told myself I wouldn't. I've learned that actually when I allow myself to truly be in receptive mode for a period of time, for as long as I really need to, I actually end up having more to offer, feeling so much better, being more articulate, helping my clients so much more powerfully, showing up in a way I feel so good about with my husband and my children. And I've learned it's something I don't just want to talk about in my podcasts. I want to model for you, my beautiful people. I want to be an example of doing this because the truth is, as highly sensitive people, we need this. Most of us don't allow ourselves these kinds of rhythms, the pulsing off and on. But we will be so much better off as a species. As people, as highly sensitive people, when we honor this. This is part of honoring our highly sensitive person trait, our finely tuned nervous systems. And I want to lead the way with a lot of other highly sensitive leaders out there who are learning to do the same. So part of that from here forward, at least for a while, we're going to try it, see how it goes. I will be putting out my podcast 3 times a month, or 3 out of 4 weeks. It will actually mirror the weeks that I work with my clients, and then the week that we take a down week, a receptive, chill week. And next week's going to be the first week where we aren't having that podcast come out, where it is a down week, a receptive, passive, lean back, chill week. And in that time, trust that all of this good stuff that you've been learning here on this podcast is integrating, is getting into you, is seeping into you, and is becoming you at like a cellular level. And then also, if you just aren't in a receptive passive mode, if you're just naturally in a more active mode, totally take that time and go back and listen to episodes you may have missed. There's so many good ones on this podcast. There's so many gems in every single podcast. So if you've already listened to all of them, then go ahead and review some. I even listen to my own podcast sometimes, and I certainly listen to other people's podcasts that I've already listened to, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good gem. I forgot about that. Right? And that letting that sink in deeper and deeper by doing reviews. So my lovely ones, I won't talk to you next week unless you listen to an older episode. And I hope you take some really lovely time to just be in receptive mode, to integrate, and even just to like have the life that you have, to be present in it without trying to do anything more with it. Rest back and enjoy. And be oh so well until a couple weeks from now.